What's up, gatekeepers? It's Coach Jack, and today we're posting the first ever Limitless Performance Podcast. We're still keeping all our old data of all our previous off the court podcasts, but this is our official first episode as Limitless Performance. And I don't have a good name to call you other than gatekeepers yet, so we're going to stick with that for now. But the biggest thing is I just wanted to make an introduction episode, kind of what this is going to be all about. And the podcast is going to be centered around our sports psychology, mindfulness, and mental training curriculum. That's mainly a lot of the things we're going to talk about because I want this podcast to be able to call to all athletes and all parents of athletes, not just basketball or volleyball players. So that's why most of what we talk about is going to be centered around the mind, how we experience the sport, and how we can change, how we interpret what happens to us, and of course create what's called the big word neuroplasticity, and change the way that our brain is wired so that we can improve performance on the court and off the court. Because I promise you, the more you listen to this podcast, the more you're going to realize, wow, I do have way more control than I thought in terms of building towards a better you and a better mind. And a better mind to work with, better self-talk, all of this stuff. I truly think that this is game and life-changing stuff that's not anywhere else right now in the sports psychology world. But what Limitless Performance is, so it's going to be a holistic approach based out of Southern Wisconsin towards youth sports performance and training. So it's going to be based around athletic training, sports psychology, basketball and volleyball training and camps. So Limitless Performance is a partnering of CTG and Athlete X Factory. We're coming together to create a powerhouse of a company. So that's why we wanted to be all our main branding is transitioning into Limitless Performance, and CTG is slowly transitioning into a local AAU basketball and volleyball club. Don't think, CTG is a waste. All we're doing is transitioning our curriculum into Limitless Performance and a bigger brand that can hopefully set up the future to change more lives. And that's really what all the partnerships trying to do, is just provide as much value as we can to the kids. And man, just imagine a world where a kid could walk into a facility and they've got weight training, sports psychology, their sport, games, leagues, AAU. It's a beautiful vision. It's going to take some time, but I definitely think that youth sports can go in this direction, and it's the best direction that it could go versus, having to go to a separate company for basketball, separate for weightlifting. I do think our vision would be the most efficient and best value for your child. I'm super, super excited about this to partner with Brad, but that is why we're changing the branding of this podcast from Off the Court CTG to Limitless Performance. So I thought I'd fill you in on that. But it's still the great, great value that we had in the past with the mental training revolution and turning into Off the Court. The reason we're putting them together is because this podcast has 21,000 listeners. So there's a huge audience here. And so that's why I wasn't going to separate the podcast. I'm putting it all into one thing, into what I'm truly passionate about. And that is the mind and how it can change your game and your life. What's up, gatekeepers? It's Coach Jack. It feels so good to be back on the Off the Court platform. We have tons of really big announcements. We're finally stopping the pause for this podcast, and we're going to get back to consistent posting schedules on Wednesdays and Sundays for the 21,000 listeners that we have on this podcast, and with over 100 5-star reviews. So we originally made separate podcasts, The Mental Training Revolution, to focus more on sports psychology for people that wanted to go on that platform. But we've realized that we're going to get a lot more listeners if we put the sports performance and the sports psychology together onto this Off the Court podcast page. And we have a really big announcement in a month for a rebranding of CTG that's going to change the whole landscape of what we do, but we're going to do it all in this podcast. So you don't have to worry about anything changing again. We're going to focus on this page for sports performance and sports psychology. Now, a lot of stuff has changed probably since the last time you've listened to this podcast. Right now, we have CTG Hoops, CTG Volleyball, and CTG Mindset, which is sports psychology, mindfulness based practices. And so these are our three main companies that are doing really successfully right now. And so that's why we're going to focus this podcast mainly around the mental training tools and education that we give to our kids through the hoops and volleyball sports. That helps them within their sport and performance in all areas of life, and especially when that ball stops bouncing. That's our main mission when we're trying to change lives. But we truly believe if you listen to the rest of this podcast and more of our content that we're going to post, we can truly change the outlook of your child's performance and life. And so how are we different? So how is this podcast going to be different? How is this not going to just be some, another sports podcast or another sports psychology podcast? Well, one, we're not a podcast that's going to say we have all the answers. Whatever guest we have on the podcast, I certainly don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. But what I do know is the stuff that I have taught our kids works. It's been tested. It works for them. And I base the curriculum on building something. It's a holistic approach. So we're not trying to trap ourselves in the corner, right? So I have a psychology degree. I've done extensive over, 500 books in reading. And if you're on the video right now, you can see all the book organizing I have behind me. And I'm not trying to brag. I'm just trying to give you some validity to what I'm saying. There's a reason that I talk about a lot of these different subjects that pertain to the mind and how we can increase sports performance. But in terms of how we're different, again, it's about building your practice. There is no one size fits all approach when we talk about something as complicated as the mind. It's the most in terms of science, it's the most unstudied subject that's out there right now. It's what we know least about, and that's why I think this is going to be such a huge thing, especially for sports psychology. Mindfulness has been a really big buzzword for a long time now, and I absolutely love the practices. That's what we base it around. But sports, I think, is the next big thing for mindfulness and psychology and philosophy to infiltrate this business and help more people, and especially athletes, become the best versions of themselves. And so again, it's based around, psychology, scientific based evidence practice. We're not just saying all these words off a whim. They're proven. They've been tested experimentally, proven over and over and over again to give it validity. And then we use philosophy, reason, so our rational mind, right? We're not trying to trap ourselves in a corner where we're all intuitive, feely, and that's how we should base our practice on. No, that's not how it works. You still have to use your rational mind, but it's finding a holistic balance between all of these practices. And then, of course, Eastern philosophy, meditation, mental training practices, that also is a big aspect of our curriculum. And again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's for me and our curriculum to give you the best opportunity to succeed, to put you in a position where you can find what works for you, right? Because what works for me is not what's going to work for you, but I have an holistic approach that could reach to potentially anyone. So now who's this podcast for? So this podcast is targeted towards young adults, so whether that's high school or college students, and parents of youth athletes. Now, I still encourage youth athletes to listen to these episodes. However, there are at times where I might talk about scientific studies or big words that might be hard for them to understand. That's why I think it's really important that parents listen to this podcast with their kids. To better explain when their kids have questions, or of course reach out to me. I'm always here to answer any questions, and I do want to do a better job in this podcast of building a relationship with the listeners. So if you ever want to talk to me, just email me, coachjack@ctghoops.com. I'll respond to anybody that emails me that has any questions related to this podcast or wants any help on their athlete journey or life journey in trying to improve their performance. And so that's who the podcast is calling towards. And so just from a general standpoint, just understand that that's what I'm making this podcast for, because yes, I do have the curriculum set up to where I can dumb it down into easy understanding for whether it's fifth or fourth graders. But that's not how I'm going to explain the podcast to the general audience, just because I know generally fifth and fourth graders aren't going to be the ones listening to this podcast, and they're not going to be the ones that are going to go out and get training in sports psychology for their kid. And again, just to reiterate, this is mainly going to be a sports psychology, mindfulness, and mental training podcast. Yes, we will talk about basketball and volleyball training because that's what our company is centered around. But the main practices that you can do by yourself from this podcast is going to be the mental training tools. You're going to get the most out of this podcast if I talk about our tested curriculum that has worked with over 100 athletes over the last couple years. And I am just super, super excited to share this experience that I've had with all of you listeners that I've been able to give to a lot of our kids. So just to give you a very simplified approach off the court, listeners, if you don't know what our curriculum is based on, I'm going to give a very simple approach to understand how this sports psychology thing works and how it's way, way different than other sports psychology practices. Yes, we're going to use similar words like pressure, nerves, confidence. We're going to use a lot of those words. But the way we approach building it is way different, and there's nothing out there in the sports psychology realm in this type of training of the mind. Now, there is, in terms of older adults, if you've ever looked into meditation or mindfulness or philosophy or stoicism, any of those types of podcasts, it's going to be very similar to that, but it's bringing it all into a curriculum that can work with each other. And this has not been brought to sports, and that's where I was getting back to. The sports psychology approaches we have today, I think, are outdated and not using a lot of this, I don't want to say new stream, but a lot of new practices that people aren't exploring in the sports psychology field, which is why I'm so excited about this, because I think we're one of the first ones to get ahead on this racetrack. But basically, how our curriculum is set up, you have the watcher and you have the wise. Okay, so there's this thing I like to call dimensions of the mind, and kids love this analogy. But most people walk around with one person in their head, and that's the dictator. So that means all the thoughts, all the feelings they have, they're identifying with constantly, and they listen to them without thinking because it's a habit in our brain, right? So there's neural connections in our brain, and when they happen over and over and over again, they can happen so fast it's hard for us to see it, and it's hard for us to change those habits. Okay, so thought habits, I like to call them, or feeling habits, right? That's the difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is out of habit, or we could call it conditioning. We are conditioned to react to certain thoughts, to certain feelings. A response is something that's in our power. So we see what's going on, and we think, am I going to respond the same way that I always do? And is this going to help me if I continue to respond out of habit? And if you're listening to this podcast, that means you want help with something. You want to learn, which is awesome. You're hungry. But we all have things to improve upon, and how we improve is changing our conditioning or changing those habits that hurt us, right? And so words for this could be wholesome or unwholesome, right? Unwholesome means they hurt you or they hurt others around you. Wholesome meaning they help you or they help others around you. And so the one person that we have in the mind that most people have walking around is what I like to call the dictator. Okay, so like I said, in identifying with everything around you, you're at whim to your habits and conditioning. Sometimes that might be a good thing, right? Sometimes your habits might be good, but most of the time they're probably not helping you, right? If you want to grow, you have to change those unwholesome habits that I just talked about. And so what we need to do is add the two key components of the dimensions of the mind. And this is one, the watcher. And so this is based around mindfulness, meditation, your ability to understand what is going on around you, to see clearly how you're thinking, how you're feeling, what's going on externally and internally. That's what these Eastern philosophy practices are going to do for you. They help you build that watcher. And like I said earlier, how we grow, how we change is we have to change our conditioning, right? We have to stop acting out of habit, whether it's in our sport. Okay, so in acting out of habit in your sport, you airball a shot. Your head goes down. You constantly ruminate on the play for, say the rest of the game. Most of us do that. That's a habit. You're acting out of conditioning. But if we build the watcher, right? If we build our ability to see and we catch ourselves, right? You see, oh, I'm getting upset with myself because I airballed. Okay, well, can I change that experience? No, I can't change the past. Well, what can I do about it right now? And that's where the wise comes in. And so this is mainly based around ancient philosophy, so Stoicism, anything that's building our logical or rational mind, philosophers like Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, all types of different philosophers. Ryan Holiday's a modern philosopher that loves to talk about Stoicism. He's someone I love to listen to. That's how we build our practice around the wise. And so if we have the ability to see, what's going on, and then that gives us the opportunity to add the wise, which is our rational mind that can reason with us. Because once we see that we're getting down on ourselves, right, that's a habit that's unwholesome. It's not helping us. It's not helping my teammates. I'm going to play worse, right? The wise allows us to stop that, to say, stop. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole again. We're not going to go down this rabbit hole where I have bad body language for the rest of the game. Okay, I'm not going to follow that bad habit. Okay, and so that's why we have this philosophical approach and this mindfulness and meditation approach to work together to build a mind that can work with ourselves, right? When we're struggling, we're fighting with ourselves. Our brain is fighting each other. Okay, that's that internal struggle and tension we feel. And the watcher and the wise is someone that stops that fighting, right? And it's truly remarkable when you come to that point and you realize, I caused myself all the struggle I have in my life and in my game. And once we learn to stop fighting, to start working with that mind, man, that's when you see absolutely crazy results. And so that was a very simplified approach, but that's how our curriculum is based, is around that dimensions of the mind. You got the dictator, the watcher, and the wise. And again, this is on YouTube if you're not watching this video to see my hand gestures, and it might make a little more sense. But if you're driving, of course, keep listening to this podcast. And then, of course, we have the curriculum simplified based around the why and the how. It is important that I explain how I got to a lot of the practices and tools that I'm going to give you as resources. And the reason for this is you're going to be much more motivated to apply the tools that I give you, whether it's a certain meditation or a certain mental training activity or a certain journaling activity, if you understand why we do it, why scientifically it works within our brain, why logically it works within our brain, right? If you understand the why, you're going to be a lot more motivated to do the how. So it's not like I just come on this podcast, I give you a mental training tool, and you go off and do it. I really strongly encourage you to listen to the entire podcast episodes that I release and announce, because that's going to give you a great education on the why behind our practices, and that's going to motivate you to do the how. Because if you do have some deep understanding of why the how works, you're going to do it more, I promise. Which is why I always encourage, we know nothing, right? We all don't know a lot. Yes, we're growing and we're getting closer towards something, but there is a lot out there that we still don't understand, and that's why I always encourage deep learning. Don't think you read one book and you're an expert on the topic. You could reread that book and see a lot of different things that you didn't see the first time you read the book, right? You can never step in the same river twice. So that's why it's really, really important that we emphasize both the why and the how to work together, because you're going to be more motivated to do the tools. And the most important thing that I tell all my students is consistency. Do the tools every day, and that's what's going to give you the best results. Some days it's not going to feel great. Some days it's going to feel great. It's not the practice feeling good or bad. It's the results it gives you in everyday life. That's the practice. Okay, and when I talk about the practice, I'm talking about the sports psychology tools you use to enhance your performance on the court or on the field, whatever it is. Rambling on there, gatekeepers, that was a very simplified approach of kind of how our sports psychology curriculum works. I do think it's going to revolutionize sports psychology because there's a lot of outdated practices. And I think combining psychology, philosophical, and Eastern meditation and mindfulness approaches is really going to give kids a applicable way to improve their mind and create real and lasting change. And I'm just so excited to share this with everyone. And if you're first time listening, please contact me, Coach Jack at ctghoops.com, if you have any questions or you ever want to talk about anything or you want more topics on the podcast or you're struggling with a certain area and you want me to make a podcast episode. I'll do that. I'll do that right away. I really want to build a relationship with you, the listeners. And I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode. But stay tuned. We're going to be posting Wednesdays and Sundays. Wednesdays are going to be focused around either interviewing people in the field or more focused on the education practices. And Sundays is mainly going to be giving out free mental training tools that we use in our sports training curriculum. With our kids. And the reason for this, that we're going to do it on Sunday, is because then you have the opportunity to experiment throughout the week if that practice works for you. And that's what I love about the Sunday approach, is try it for a week. If you really like that practice, keep doing it. If you don't, we're going to try a new one the next Sunday. So that's how we're going to try and set up the schedule. And of course, follow us on all our social media platforms. Right now it's CTG Integral. So right now, gatekeepers, our social medias are still CTG Integral. We have a slow transition into the partnering with Athlete X Factory and turning into Limitless Performance. So give us some time on that, but follow us on our normal social media pages for now. I said earlier in the video, Coach Jack at ctghoops.com, but I prefer you contact me now at my new email, coachjack at limitlessperformancewi.com. Again, I'm not going to get upset if you do the other email, but again, we're trying to slowly transition this branding so that, in a year from now, we got it consistent and we know where everyone's going. The biggest thing, though, is please give me feedback. I want to become friends with a listener. Like, we have had 21,000 listens on this podcast, and I haven't talked to a lot of people that have listened to it. I might run by a few people and they'll say, hey, I love your podcast, but I really want feedback. Is this helping you? How can I be better? I really just want to give you the best opportunity that I can to kind of, skip the steps that I've had to make in terms of learning deeply about all this stuff and what I can give to you to kind of alleviate or solve whatever it is you're going through. So please contact me. I want to become your friend. I want to build a relationship, and I really, really want to help you. So yeah, stay in touch with me. I'll make some episodes for you. Thank you so much, Gatekeepers. It's so, so good to be back. Until next time, I'm Coach Jack. Peace.